Eduardo, take it away, please.
Yeah. So hey everyone. So on today's, I'm not really gonna walk through NMR, but rather through the process of having multiple MRs running at the same time. So sequential MRs, splitting MRs, that kind of thing. The goal of all of this is move to a workflow complete as fast as possible. um, without sacrificing the quality of the things. So minimize the time wasted on MRs itself, on admin work, and get things moving faster. So how we do this? We do this by minimizing the time between the first reviewer being assigned and the time of it being merged. So for example, minimize the number of conversations happening, number of comments that you need to address, maximize the time usage where the reviews are being conducted. So do not wait for a review to finish to already have something else going on. Even if it's sequential, like you push an MR early and then you push another MR, and always have multiple MRs being reviewed at the same time. So those are the hows. The first step for that is write good MRs. So that's the first step. I'm not going to go into detail over this because this is learning over time. I want to talk about more splitting MRs rather than this, but write good instructions, follow GitLab patterns, even if you don't really like them. It's easier to get something merged that follow patterns than trying to argue against the pattern. You might do that for some specific case, but save your energy for the cases you really feel strong about it. But in general, just accept the messages, work through. It's easier, for example, a nitpick to solve quickly rather than having a back and forth that can make you lose a lot of time. And then the other part is also related to write good MRs, but splitting MRs is some of the best ways to achieve this. I'm going to go through a few examples of some issues that I have split MRs and what I've learned with them, and then I'm going to condense these learnings. So first of all, this is a recent one for last milestone. So adding audit events. A lot of these MRs are very similar. So if you look at this, for example, they're all a YAML file, something on the documentation, and then a very small code that is pretty much copy-paste across all of the MRs. So some include some change in the service, but most of them are just like a YAML file, a document. This is generated automatically, and the code. So I could have put everything into the same MR, but that would, so it was a total of 5 MRs. That should be about 25 files changed. When a reviewer sees 25 file changed, they automatically get there. It's not nice to see that. Like, you're not invited to review them, or you know that you're going to spend a lot of time. So probably if I have a 25 change review, I have to save a block of my time to review. And if it's a 6 file change with just like some like 112, I will just review now. I see that the review request is coming, so I'll just take it over. One of the things that I did wrong on this MR was that every MR changes this compliance file. So every MR, I add a compliance event, and this is generated based on that YAML file, which meant I had a lot of rebase problems, a lot of merge conflicts, since all of the 5 MRs were trying to change the same thing. I couldn't really like let it go, like have the reviews going and then merge it right after, which was a problem. What I could have done is write one MR with all of the event names or all of the event changes and one example of how it's going to be used. That way I would have removed the dependency, and subsequent MRs would just use that event, and would be much easier. There wouldn't be any rebase problems. There was something else that I wanted to talk about this MR specifically. And yeah, so another thing is that MRs need 2 reviewers generally, unless it's very simple, then you just need, if you think it's a very simple MR that doesn't have a lot of complexity, you can ask the maintainer if it's okay to skip review. But in this case, there was a little bit more complexity, so I had to ask the reviewer review that. And so even if I had all of those merge request problems with rebases, at least the first review would have been done for all of these MRs, and then I could just later on focus once the MRs were being merged together. Then I would have been it would be easier to merge everything. So in generally, what happened here is that I had what the situation that I caused with that MR is because it depended on the file. So I had MR A depending on MR B, depending on MRC, depending on MRD, right? Ideally, what I want to go is instead go through A that depend, which will B, C, and D will depend on. But B and C and D are not depending between each other. That way I could have all of these 3 being reviewed and merged at the same time. This kind of dependency tree is really important when you are working on full stack MRs. So you have an issue that has a bit of a back end, a bit of front end. So you can decouple this dependency tree. You can get MRs merged faster. The second series of MRs, this is not really one issue, but it's a feature in itself. So we're working on this at the beginning of the year in incubation engineering. We were 4 engineers working on this. And the problem we had here, the problem that we tried to solve with splitting MRs, is that we wanted folks to work in parallel. We didn't want one person to depend on the work of the other all the time. So our solution for this was a few MRs in the beginning that were sequential that set up the foundation. So set up the foundation for the controller, set up the foundation for the GraphQL, set up the foundation for the View app. And once those are in place, because there wasn't really a way to do parallel work without those, then we were free. Each one was free to pick up and work in parallel between us. And then we had 40 MRs on this. And between the 4 of us in the span of 2 months, that was a milestone and a half with 40 MRs and a full MVC merged to the code base. Another one here is this is for about refactoring. So a while ago, I introduced the init simple app helper, which just makes it easier to set up a Vue app. And I had a bunch of other apps that I wanted to refactor for this. If I had refactor all of them in the same MR, the MR would be pretty huge. So I could have introduced an MR only with the init simple app. It would be a small MR, about, I don't know, a few hundred lines of changes. But one of the things that happen when you introduce only the MR with that kind of support feature is that the reviewers don't know how it's going to be used. So it becomes harder for reviewers to do a proper, they just look at the code, but they don't look at the context. So it's good to give context to the reviewers. And whenever I'm doing a refactor MR, I try to include at least one example of how it's going to be used. And then later I pull in all of, once that is merged, because this also defines how the other places are going to be changed. If, for example, I had 5 different scenarios here, 5 use cases of init simple help. This MR had a lot of a conversation on, like there is a discussion between me and Paul over here that I'm trying to find that had like something like 20 replies. imagine that if every reply I had to change all of the 5 signatures of all of the usage across, so I would have a lot of time like going through the comments. So having one, and then after that was finished, then I went to the others. Then implemented the other ones, because then I knew what is the signature of the function, and I can just focus on implementing. That created a few very small MRs that were done afterwards, and that is the way. This is a little bit, no, this is not really too large, about 131 lines total in 8 files, so that's okay. So that's another thing when you have this kind of refactor scenario, refactor only one, include the code that for the refactor, and I think I have another example of this that I'll share later. That was a lot that added a lot more discussion. Let me see if I can find this. Merged. It was about using inheritance to decouple the package registry.
We can also link it later if that's easier.
Yeah. I think on this one I didn't add an example. I already found it. No, this one I didn't add an example.
I'm amazed you got this single table inheritance accepted. It must be the first one, right?
Well, it was a table that already existed and already used table inheritance, but it just wasn't easy. Like it had everything about inheritance, but just not the good part of it. So it just made it simpler to use the good part. So I did some changes, but then this was a whole discussion. Like you see the issue, there's like hundreds of comments. It was a lot of back and forth between me and the database team and the package. I was working on model registry at this stage, and the model is a package. So this is, and then I split the other one as an example of how to use that. So one of the, I had this MR already open. So I had both of the MRs open already. And I kept linking the example MR to the first MR for the reviewers so that they had the context on how to use it. But then again, then this MR became small. This MR was also focused. If something needed to be reverted, it was easy to revert. Like I didn't have like, if I got something worse that was bad, it was actually quite easy to revert everything. Let's go back to the doc. So I'm gonna add another example. Example 4. What's the name? Single STI for packages package. And the other, I forgot which one. Okay, and this is an example that I'm gonna work through on this milestone. This is a full stack issue, so I will have to add a front end over here for the UI of blocking that cannot be deleted, but I'll probably have to change the query. I don't know if the query has this, but I'll check if the query has this or not. But if it doesn't, I'll probably have to implement something on the query side. So my strategy for this is minimizing the number of reviewers in the same MR. If you have 4 reviewers on the same MR, it will take a much longer time to review than if you need only 2. I had MRs in the past when I was naive in the company, and that I had, my maximum was 10 MR, 10 reviewers, database, front end, back end, UX, and documentation. So that was my maximum amount. And I've learned with that you don't do that, because it just gets really confusing. Some conversations happen and then you lose the approvals because you had to push a commit somewhere else, and then you had to request a reapproval. It's just not a good experience. So split between as much as you can between the components of reviewers. Sometimes it's not possible, like you have to add some change to the HAML file that will require a backend. But usually then those changes are very simple and you can just skip the reviewer review. So instead of having 4, you have 3 reviewers. The reviewer is just going to say, okay, this is fine. There's not even much. It's just a type of approval for others, then something too large. So this is what I'm going to approach here. I'm probably going to add, like Julie's doing, add a mock to have this done eventually. Let's check here. Yeah. So I'll probably add a mock so that the front end stays front end, and then do the back end changes so that the back end stays back end. And then I'm going to do a third MR that combines both of them into one. So it's going to be a process of 3 MRs. 2 of them can go in parallel. One will need a little bit of time to get. We'll need both of them. So my strategy here is that I have A and B running parallel with C depending on them. So this is going to be A is back and front end, and then this is cleanup. So this is on this one, for example, on the audit events at the end of the MR process, I noticed that I had a bug that I was using the wrong scope for, not like somebody finally answered me somewhere that I was using there's a better scope. So this is a changes that is a little large number of files, 16 files. This number is scary. It's just 20 lines and they are pretty much the same. But I figured that in this case, I should put everything in the same place because the changes are not that complicated. They are not complicated at all. There's no complexity. It's just busy work of things that need to be done. I'll have, if I had split them are, this would again be a problem, the event types. And on this case, I just tagged one of the reviewers, which was Igor on the team as well. Assigning people from the team is also a great way of speeding up reviews. I like to assign people from outside, especially at the maintainer. Ideally, the reviewer is from the team and the maintainer is from the outside of the team. That's kind of how things are set up. But often that's, in this case specifically, just assigning someone on the team. It was just simple. We wouldn't inform anyone about anything. So it's just assigning. And then since it was simple, I just assigned Igor to this, and yeah, it was merged quite fast. So I got to merge all of the 7 MRs within the span of 2 days, 2 days and 2 days and a half. So that was that's how it was done. Okay, so the general learnings that I have with this is 200 is a good goal for MR process, like for the lines, it doesn't scare. 200 lines and 6 to 9 files is a good goal. Sometimes you have to pass this if it makes sense, but if you can split under, it makes it easier for reviewers. Since they tend to pick up smaller first, just to get rid of them. And when you split on that size, if you have someone commenting on one area of the code, like I spoke about on the front end, so somebody's talking about the front end, but the back end is already merged. If you have everything in the same MR, then you cannot merge either of them. And that backend could already be supporting some other change that you have, right? So split on this kind of dependencies. You can skip if you feel confident that MR is simple enough, just a few lines of change, you can skip the review. This is a good thing to do because it unlocks that reviewer to review another MR. So it kind of like removes a little bit of the bottleneck. But if it's a little bit complex, it adds more time to the maintainer to review. And maintainer is a bigger bottleneck than a reviewer. So you have to balance it out a little bit. If you're confident that it's simple, it's easier. If you are a reviewer, which every one of us should be eventually, this becomes a little bit easier because then you know what is a simple MR for review, and then you can already expect what's going to be simple or not. So becoming a reviewer is a big part of being able to write faster MRs. Yeah, and you don't want to go too small. So for example, like if you have a small change, like a small change that you can split, but it doesn't really need it, will just increase the amount of reviewers, and that will increase the amount of time, and that's not a good thing. Minimize the number of reviewers in a single MR. I already spoke about this. And very important in full stack because your dependencies are all over the place. And they're like the front-end reviewer doesn't really care about the back-end changes, just care about the interface. So setting up the mocks is a good idea. On the back end, you can do something similar. So for example, on avoid front-end changes and things like that. This pull common dependencies to the first MR to avoid excessive rebases. I spoke about this twice. One on the audit. So there was one common dependency, which was the documentation file that caused a lot of merge conflicts. I need to keep like, once one was merged, I had to go to the other and rebase and push again, request review again. So there was a lot of admin work happening over there, which was a bit annoying. So pull those dependencies first, add an example, and then work on the rest of it. You can already have a little bit of setup for the others, but have that merged first. And for sequential MRs, meaning those that you cannot split into the dependencies. So this kind of, sometimes you have to do A, B, C, and D. Sometimes there's no, you want to keep it smaller, but you need some changes that happen prior for that change to work. Two tips on this is to use stacked diffs. This is a feature we added recently, the code review team added recently. It does a little bit of this admin work of having multiple branches for each of the MRs and rebasing them and updating them. So this already helps a lot. And if you're not using stacked diffs, what I do is I have each MR has a branch, and instead of every MR targeting master, I have the MRs targeting the previous branch. So if I have B depending on A, B doesn't target master, B targets A, the branch of A, because then it just shows the diff for that specific MR. And yeah, so otherwise it will show both the changes of A and B on MRB. It makes harder, so you have to be explaining to the reviewers what is part of the MR, what is not, and it just becomes annoying. And yeah, that's it. Questions?
Just want to say we've only got 5 minutes to the next call, but Eduardo, absolutely incredible presentation, and I'm even thinking this is almost like a handbook page what you've written there. But if Mohammed or Julie, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Eduardo. It's really cool. But yeah, like I think there is a big part about the reviewing time that you are consuming when you are asking another reviewer. This is my only comment, like when I ask another reviewer outside of the team or a maintainer or something, things might be moving slowly, right? If we want, for example, to go GA very quick, I tend to just ping Igor, hey Igor, can you just review this? Hey Patrick, can you just maintain this? So I do this recently. I know GitLab is like, yeah, we need to spread knowledge and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, at this time, I feel we should be more like focusing on reviewing MRs as quick as possible to just go to GA. But other than that, after that, I think we should exactly follow your handbook for MR. Thank you for that.
It's a trade-off. Like part of the audit thing is that I had, I don't know, total of 12 different reviewers that needed to pick up context, or just shoot. It's always a trade-off on how you approach this. Like none of these are rules. They are more like ideas and learnings. They might not make sense in some specific scenarios. Like I already showed examples where it didn't make sense to split an MR, even though it was possible. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks for this, Eduardo. This was super, super helpful with all the tips. I really like the point about minimizing reviewers. I felt like a light bulb sort of went off with that. It's like, if you split it up the right way, you can get it merged super quickly. And also that last point about like the A to B to C dependency as well, because that was like sometimes I have that issue where I branch off of a branch and then all the diffs are in the same MR, and then I feel like I can't put that up for review until the other one, and then I can rebase. So yeah, I like your idea of not targeting master and just so you can get MR super clean.
Stacked diffs will do this automatically for you. So it pushes all of the branches, tries to keep It doesn't work with parallel MRs. So if you have this setup here, I don't think it works. But for this, it's focused on this setup, where you have like this sequential. So you can use part of it for something, and it creates already like on the title, it already adds all of the previous MRs that were merged or whether they were not merged at all. So it gives a little bit of a better experience.
I'll have to check it out. Thank you.
Well, I've got a question about that same topic about the targeting the other branches. So when do you rebase constantly to keep those up to date? And do you use the slash command or a command line?
Once it depends on how you do. If you point the rebase to the branch, sometimes when the branch is merged, you don't need to do anything because the Git object, especially if there's only one commit and the committers are not squashed, then the object, the hash, is already present on master, so you don't need to rebase anything. It will already work nicely. That is not often the case. More often than not, you need to rebase because the hash changed and the commit that is the branch B is depending on doesn't exist anymore. So there will be some conflicts. But then rebasing is simple, right? Because it's just you do rebase -I, and you delete the change on your and just accept the change on master, and then it should move quite quickly. But it is a downside of the process. You have to do this like branch foo to make all things run properly and nicely.
Yep. Eduardo, really put an awesome presentation. Thank you so much. Definitely over and above for our typical MR walkthrough. And yeah, there are some really amazing notes you put in the shared document, and maybe at some time when time permits, might be worth even adding some of those to the handbook. I think they're just awesome. Thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording.